December 26, 1944. Assenau, Belgium. Lieutenant Charles Boggis Jr. stood in the turret of his M4A3E2 Jumbo Sherman, nicknamed Cobra King, watching artillery shells pound the village ahead. Behind him, 8 more Shermans from Company C, 37th Tank Battalion, idled in the freezing fog. 5 miles north, the 101st Airborne Division had been surrounded in Bastogne for 8 days, and Boggis had orders to punch through at all costs. German tank crews called the Sherman Tommykocher, the Tommykocher, mocking its supposed tendency to burst into flames when hit. Wehrmacht reports dismissed American armor as inferior machinery operated by inexperienced crews. Panzer commanders entering the Ardennes offensive believed their Tigers, Panthers, and even Panzer IVs would sweep aside the thin American armored screen like paper. The mathematics of tank combat in the winter of 1944 would prove them catastrophically wrong. In 6 brutal weeks, American Sherman crews would help destroy over 320 German Panzers in the Ardennes, hold the northern shoulder against elite SS formations, relieve Bastogne, and ultimately shatter Hitler's last great offensive in the West. The story wasn't about technical superiority, it was about logistics, tactics, crew training, and something the Germans could no longer afford: replacements, the mockery, German confidence and American reality. The nickname Tommykocher has become one of World War II's most persistent myths. The term actually originated in World War I, referring to British ration heaters, not burning tanks. While German soldiers reportedly used variations of the name for various Allied vehicles, the idea that they systematically called Shermans Ronsons that light every time is a post-war fabrication. The famous Ronson lighter slogan wasn't even used during the war, but German. Contempt for American armor was real enough. On paper, their confidence seemed justified. The Panthers' 75mm KWK-42 gun could penetrate a Sherman's frontal armor at 2,000 yards. The Tiger's fearsome 80mm could do the same at even greater distances. Meanwhile, the standard Sherman's 75mm gun struggled to penetrate a Panther's frontal armor at any combat range, and was nearly useless against a Tiger from the front. The technical specifications told a brutal story. M4 Sherman, 75mm, 51mm frontal armor, 75mm M3 gun, 437 rounds per minute rate of fire, 25 mph top speed, operational range of 120 miles. Panzer IV's Panther, 80mm frontal glacis armor, effectively 140mm due to slope. 75mm KK-42 L70 gun, 34 mph top speed, 124-mile operational range, but consuming fuel at nearly double the Sherman's rate. Tigerwasser, 100mm frontal armor, 40 KK-36 L56 gun, 23 mph top speed. Fuel consumption so high that operational range was barely 85 miles under combat conditions. Tiger II, King Tiger, 150mm of frontal armor, Tommykocher K43 L71 gun, 70 tons of metal that could barely reach 26 mph and consumed fuel at a staggering rate, with bridges collapsing under its weight and engines breaking down with alarming frequency. German tank crews entering the Battle of the Bulge believed these specifications guaranteed victory. What they didn't account for was everything that happened between the spec sheets. The ambush December 16, 1944, when 600,000 German soldiers, supported by 1,900 artillery pieces and approximately 600 tanks and assault guns, slammed into 80,000 American troops holding the Ardennes sector on December 16, 1944. The initial hours seemed to confirm German expectations. The Americans had roughly 240 Sherman tanks initially available, scattered among various tank and tank destroyer battalions supporting 4 infantry divisions. At the twin villages of Krinkelt-Rocherath, Panthers and Panzer IVs from the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend smashed into defensive positions held by elements of the 741st Tank Battalion. Using darkness and fog, German Panzer 470s knocked out 3 Shermans in the initial engagement, and fierce building-to-building fighting erupted. But then something unexpected happened. American defenders, infantry with bazookas towed 3-inch anti-tank guns, M4 Shermans and M10 tank destroyers held their ground. The Panthers, charging headlong down the main road without adequate infantry support, became perfect targets. Bazooka teams hidden in buildings hammered the German armor. By nightfall on December 18th, the attackers had lost 21 German armored vehicles to bazooka teams alone, with another 27 destroyed by guns and anti-tank mines. The 12th SS Panzer Division had been decimated, and the ISS Panzer Corps was forced to change its plans. The Sherman crews were learning what German tankers had forgotten. In close terrain, with proper support, even inferior tanks could kill the best armor in the world. The relief: Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Williams. Abrams Jr. stood beside his Sherman Thunderbolt 6. On December 26th, watching C-47 transports drop supplies over Bastogne. His 37th Tank Battalion had been ordered by General George S. Patton to drive like hell to relieve the surrounded 101st Airborne. For 5 brutal days, they'd advanced just 22 miles through German paratroopers, landmines, shell craters, snow, fog, and ice. Abrams was a tanker's tanker. He led from the front, in the turret of his own tank. "I can recall during our tank battles Abe was shooting tanks like the rest of the boys," remembered another crew member. "He would mix in wherever the toughest battle was. It made us feel like fighting harder when you could see a great man like Abe alongside of you." At 3:00 p.m., Abrams received permission to make his final push. "We're going into those people now," he radioed. "Let her roll." Lieutenant Charles Boggess took the lead in his up-armored jumbo Sherman. Cobra King, a variant with additional inch-thick armor plates welded onto the standard Sherman hull, bringing frontal protection to over 100 mm. The jumbo was slower, but could survive hits that would destroy a standard Sherman. Artillery pounded Assiniboia as the column rumbled forward. At 1,000 yards, Abrams personally engaged a German self-propelled gun from Thunderbolt 6 turret, destroying it with a single 76 mm round. Company C's 9 tanks drove straight through the village in high gear, leaving them mopping up to following units. Shortly before 5 p.m., Boggess shook hands with an engineer lieutenant from the 101st Airborne at the Bastogne perimeter. The 8-day siege was broken, but the fighting was far from over. The Sherman's secret weapons, not what you think. The German mockery of American tanks focused obsessively on firepower and armor. They missed everything else that mattered. Reliability. A Sherman could travel 120 miles before refueling. The average Sherman in the Ardennes required maintenance every 200-300 miles of operation. Compare this to the Tiger II, which broke down approximately every 50-80 miles and consumed fuel so voraciously that most King Tigers in the Battle of the Bulge were abandoned, not because they were knocked out, but because they ran out of gas or broke down on the narrow, winding roads. Crew survivability. Despite the Tommykocher myth, Sherman crews had among the highest survival rates of any tank in the war. Large hatches, quick escape features, and by late 1944, wet stowage ammunition systems dramatically reduced fire hazards. Early war Shermans with dry ammunition storage saw 60–80% of penetrated tanks catch fire. With wet stowage ammunition stored in water glycerin jackets, this dropped to 10–15%. British studies of tank casualties in Northwest Europe showed that Sherman crews suffered approximately 1.4 casualties per knocked-out tank from armor-piercing hits. Polish armored units reported losing approximately 1 crew for every 5 destroyed tanks. German crews had no such luxury. Panthers and Tigers, with their cramped interiors and poor crew escape features, were often death traps when penetrated. Production and replacement. By late 1944, the United States had produced approximately 50,000 Shermans. Germany had manufactured roughly 6,000 Panthers and 1,347 Tiger IS. When Lieutenant Colonel Abrams lost tanks, they were replaced within days from depots just behind the front lines. When a German Kampfgruppe lost a Panther, it was gone forever. The numbers from the Ardennes tell the story. From December 13, 1944 to January 19, 1945, 1st and 3rd U.S. Armies lost approximately 66 M4 medium tanks and 145 M5A1 light tanks. Tank destroyer losses added another 249 vehicles. These losses represented roughly 30% of American armor committed to the battle. But here's what mattered. Every one of those losses could be replaced. More importantly, most of the knocked-out American tanks were recovered and repaired. American maintenance crews operated mobile repair facilities just behind the front lines, recovering damaged vehicles and returning them to service within 24 hours. Germany lost approximately 320 tanks in the Ardennes, roughly 40% of the 724 tanks and assault guns they committed to the offensive. Just under half of the Panzer IVs were lost by January 15th, along with 40% of the Panthers. More critically, the Germans couldn't recover most of their disabled vehicles as they retreated. American tactics deliberately targeted German tanks to ensure they burned, making them unrecoverable. By February 5, 1945, the entire Western Front had only 190 operational German tanks, 533 assault guns, and 87 Panzerjägers, facing perhaps 10 times that number of Allied tanks. The variants, not all Shermans, were created equal. The Sherman wasn't really a single tank, it was a family of constantly evolving designs. By December 1944, approximately one-third of American Shermans in the Ardennes mounted the 76mm high-velocity gun, a dramatic improvement over the original 75mm. The M4A3 with 76mm gun could penetrate a Panther's gun mantlet at 700-800 yards, not ideal, but workable with good tactics. More importantly, it could reliably destroy any Panther or Tiger, from the side or rear at normal combat ranges of 600-800 yards. Then there was the M4A3E2, jumbo 140 assault tanks with additional armor bringing protection to over 100mm on the frontal glacis. These tanks led attacks, absorbing hits that would destroy standard Shermans. Cobra King, which led the relief of Bastogne, was a jumbo. While the extra armor dropped top speed from 30 mph to about 22 mph, the increased survivability made them invaluable for spearhead operations. The British contribution shouldn't be forgotten. Some 351 British Sherman tanks, including Fireflies mounting the devastating 17-pounder gun, were used to backfill replacement needs in 1st and 3rd Armies. The Firefly's 17-pounder could penetrate a Tiger II's frontal armor at combat ranges with APDS ammunition, making it one of the few Allied tanks the Germans genuinely feared. Christmas Eve at Frauvillers, when experience met iron. On December 24, 1944, Task Force Kane, a dozen M4 Shermans and 5 M5A1 Stuart light tanks from the 3rd Armored Division's 32nd Armored Regiment faced off against Panthers from German formations defending the Belgian hamlet of Frauvillers. The morning engagement was chaos. Panthers hidden in tree lines engaged the American Shermans at range. Within minutes, 4 Shermans were knocked out, their crews scrambling for cover in a ravine. The technical superiority of German armor seemed confirmed, but the battle wasn't over. As evening approached, the Germans attempted to exploit their success, but their Panthers became separated from their infantry support in the confusing terrain. American tank destroyers and surviving Shermans worked together, using the terrain for cover, flanking the Panthers. Supporting artillery zeroed in on German positions. When the battle ended on Christmas Eve, both sides had paid dearly. The Americans lost 5 Shermans and 2 Stuarts. The Germans lost 5 Panthers, with several more damaged, a roughly even exchange in numbers, but a devastating blow to German offensive capability they couldn't afford. The battle demonstrated a crucial truth. Tank versus tank combat rarely occurred in the wide-open plains the Germans preferred. In close terrain, forests, villages, hills, tactical skill, combined arms coordination, and simple numerical superiority mattered more than technical specifications. The human element. Why American crews, one Staff Sergeant Abe Baum of the 4th Armored Division later said of Lieutenant Colonel Abrams, "He was sincere, honest, didn't speak down to people. He wore out 6 tanks, all named Thunderbolt, during the war, but he never had one shot out from under him." That simple statement reveals everything. American tank commanders led from the front, often with the same tank throughout entire campaigns. They learned their crew's capabilities, understood their equipment's limitations, and adapted tactics accordingly. American tank training emphasized flexibility and combined arms. Tank crews worked closely with infantry, artillery, and tank destroyers. When facing Panthers, Sherman crews learned to work in groups, one tank drawing fire while others flanked for side shots. They learned to use artillery to suppress German tanks while maneuvering. They learned that mobility often mattered more than armor. German tank crews in December 1944 were increasingly inexperienced. The Reich had lost its best tankers in 3 years of brutal combat on the Eastern Front. The crews manning Panthers and Tigers in the Ardennes offensive often had minimal training. Quality control in late-war German tank production had collapsed. Panthers breaking down due to manufacturing defects became common. Meanwhile, American tankers benefited from reliable supply chains, comprehensive maintenance support, and immediate replacements for battle losses. When a Sherman crew survived a knocked-out tank, they received a new tank and returned to the fight. When a German crew survived, they often had no replacement vehicle. The aftermath: victory through attrition. By January 25, 1945, the Battle of the Bulge was over. American casualties were appalling. 81,000 total casualties, including 19,246 killed. But German losses were irreplaceable: approximately 100,000 killed, wounded, or missing, and the loss of their last mobile armored reserve in the West. The Sherman's performance in the Ardennes challenged every pre-war assumption about tank warfare. Yes, German tanks had superior guns and armor. Yes, in a one-on-one duel on open terrain, a Panther would usually defeat a Sherman. But warfare isn't conducted on spec sheets. The Sherman won because it could be produced in overwhelming numbers. It was reliable enough to actually reach the battlefield. Its crews could be rapidly trained and replaced. It was simple enough to be maintained by its own crews. It was mobile enough to exploit opportunities. It worked effectively as part of combined arms. Teams the Tommykocher burned, but so did every other tank when hit by modern anti-tank weapons. The difference was that Sherman crews usually survived, received new tanks, and returned to kill more Panthers. In one of the largest tank-on-tank engagements of the war at Ardennes, France, Lieutenant Colonel Abrams's 37th Tank Battalion lost 14 Shermans while destroying 55 Panthers and Tigers. At Krinkelt-Rocherath, bazooka teams and supporting Shermans destroyed 48 German armored vehicles in 2 days. At Bastogne, outnumbered American armor held off repeated Panzer assaults until relief arrived. The German mockery of the Sherman was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of modern warfare. They saw tank combat as medieval jousting, individual duels decided by the biggest gun and thickest armor. Americans understood it as industrial warfare, where logistics, reliability, combined arms, and replaceable losses determined victory. Legacy: the tank that conquered through endurance. When the M1A1 Abrams entered service in 1980, it was named after Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Williams Abrams, Jr., the man who led from the turret of his Sherman through France, Belgium, and into Germany. His 37th Tank Battalion's motto was courage, conquers, and they proved it by reaching the Rhine before any other unit in Patton's Third Army. The Sherman served in frontline combat with the U.S. Army through the Korean War and with Allied nations into the 1970s. Israeli M51 Super Shermans, modified with French 105-meter guns, fought effectively in the Six-Day War of 1967, over 20 years after the Battle of the Bulge. The Battle of the Bulge proved that in modern warfare, the side that can field, fuel, repair, and replace its armor wins, regardless of whether individual tanks are inferior on paper. German panzer commanders learned this lesson too late, watching their irreplaceable Tigers and Panthers burn or break down in the Ardennes snows, while American Shermans kept coming, kept fighting, and ultimately kept winning. The Germans never mocked the Sherman again. By the spring of 1945, when Sherman columns rolled across the Rhine and drove into the heart of the Reich, panzer crews had learned what American tankers knew all along: victory doesn't go to the tank with the thickest armor or biggest gun. Victory goes to the tank that's actually on the battlefield when it matters, with fuel in its tanks, shells in its racks, and a trained crew at the controls. The Sherman wasn't the best tank of World War II. It was something more important. It was the tank that won.